Hello and welcome to Insiders, a podcast all about the world of television with me, Peter Fincham.
And me, Jimmy Mulville.
This is a podcast for people who love TV and who want to know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes in show business.
It is.
Jimmy, here we are.
Yes.
We're not sitting in a room together.
No.
And tell us where you are and why that is.
I'm in the beautiful city of Edinburgh, called Athens of the North, because it's, let's face it, it's hilly. And you soon find that out when you try and walk around. I'm up here with my son, Joe. And we come up every year with a selection of my children to really to kind of see as many
your children. It makes sounds as if you have like as many children as you might get in a box of chocolates.
No, I'm not up into Boris Johnson numbers, but I've got four children which I know of, and we try and get a collection to come up here, and we do a kind of pub crawl of stand-up comedy. We do. Yesterday I did 7 shows.
Oh my goodness! Okay,
and I got to bed at 12:30 this morning, but I have seen some really good shows.
Go on then, Nate, tell us about people you've seen.
I think there's a brilliant show called Eat the Rich about a young Liverpool woman who gets a place at Cambridge. And she,
you could relate to that.
Well, I related very much to it, and she has a similar experience to me, kind of fitting in and not fitting in, and it had a kind of Saltburny thing, but I thought it was fantastic. I have to say. And then I saw a show which is remarkable. I think it's probably one of the best shows I've ever seen. I know that sounds kind of hyperbolic. A guy called David Elms. It's called David Elms Describes the Room. I'm not going to tell you any more than that, except it is one of the most magical hours I've spent in the theatre. David Elms Describes the Room. Anyway, but what I'm confronted with...
These are stars of tomorrow, are they?
Well, the truth is that there was one comedian who was most of his act was moaning about how he comes to Edinburgh every year, and he's very good, by the way, a very, 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 very good comedian called Vittorio Angeloni. He's from Northern Ireland, and he's on the edge. He's a kind of Lenny Brucey kind of figure, a bit. Very, very skilled comedian. But he says, I've never had any interest in TV, a little bit here and there.
But do you think when a comedian, today in 2025 says, I don't have much interest in television, do you think... Well, that's a sign of changing times, because there was a time when kind of all comedians in Edinburgh wanted to get onto television. Or do you think he doesn't? Do you think he doesn't mean it? And what he means is television's never had much interest in me.
Oh no, I think he wants to get onto television. I think he was saying, I'm here, but I've had no interest in me being on television.
Oh, okay.
He wants to be on television. In fact, quite a few of them who've been on Have I Got News For You mention the fact they've been on Have I Got News For You, and and joke about that. So they do, I think they do, because it sells tickets. If you can get onto a BBC One show and be funny before you go on tour. I remember one very famous comedian we were trying to get on Have I Got News For You for ages and ages. He shall remain nameless, Lee Mack. And we just couldn't get him on the show. And then his agent rang up and said, Lee's available now. I said, is he about to go on tour? And I said, yeah, well, actually, coincidentally, he is going to go on tour, but that's got nothing to do with it. I mean, we're always very happy to have Lee Mack on the show. But anyway, by the way, lots of TV people up here. Looking at shows. I've seen people from BBC, from Channel 4, and they're going to see lots of shows. I've been in 3 or 4 venues where there have been senior commissioning people looking at new talent, which is great, I think.
Good.
It's then how do you translate that into TV? Well, there are ways and means now. They have short form blaps and short films which they try and blood these people. So I don't think the pipeline is completely been shut down. I just think it's a bit narrower. But I have to say,
partly because there's so many shows. So far more shows, harder to stand out, and so on.
There are 3,000, and that's why the posters now are getting more and more. I mean, what is interesting is how organised it is. For example, United Agents, as you know, a big, powerful agency in London, they have a huge poster with the pictures of all their talent on it. Well, when you and I were in Edinburgh in the 1970s, that never happened. It was far too kind of do-it-yourself in those days, where now it's much more organised. And the posters are getting the titles are getting more and more outlandish. Tomatoes Tried to Kill Me, but Banjos Saved My Life is one of my favourites.
That's a good title.
Three Chickens Confront Existence. Would you go and see that?
Well, the reason you go and see things is word of mouth. If you so you've just told me about those two people you thought were absolutely brilliant.
You're going to go.
Miss my chance.
Yeah, you're going to go.
I'd go and see them. Word of mouth is everything.
I'm never going to go and see a show called Do Astronauts Masturbate in Space? I'm just putting it out.
But if I told you it was brilliant, you would.
I probably would. I'd wear a cagoule.
Now, as well as you, so you've been at the Fringe, but there's also the television festival, which is going on as we speak.
Today is the big opening debate, and the opening debate is going to be called "The Future Is Now." TV's place.
Very original theme. They've never thought of that in the last 40 Edinburgh television festivals. Nobody's thought about a debate about the future.
No, and the logline is TV's place in the New World Order. So it'll be a lot of people on stage, as we've always said, trying to predict the future in an industry where it's impossible to predict what is going to happen. But anyway, they've got some really good people, and it's always interesting. It depends how not honest people are, but how unfettered they feel to actually voice their real opinions without actually feeling impeded by the corporation they're working for or their own particular, their relationship with the corporations they want to work with. You know what I mean? It does feel a bit sometimes is a bit, for example, I heard that one senior commissioning editor this week had 2 hours of media training before they do their panel today.
Wow.
Now, when you were a controller, because you were a controller of many, many different organizations, Peter.
Two.
But they're very big organizations. Did they give you any media training? Did they kind of sit you down and say, Peter, you can't say
I think media training's put it a bit strongly. You had kind of alongside you a press person, who was your, kind of pretty much attached to you. And in my case, I was lucky that I had people I really liked and I really respected. And they would definitely come up with a list of subjects to avoid, questions you might get asked, suggestions of how to deflect this one or deal with that one. But I wouldn't call it as much as media training. And I felt very strongly that being, to use a modern word, authentic was more important than sounding as if you'd been... it sounded as if you were a politician on the Today programme, who was asked a question and then turned it into another question because it was the only one they had an answer to. I think that's all a bit, silly, and I tried to avoid that. But there's no doubt. I think I did 11 controller sessions in a row. I think the first 3 were the BBC, so the next 8 would have been ITV. And it's a bit of a journey, dare I say it, from fear to boredom, because when you first do one, it's intimidating, and you're aware that the purpose of a controller session supposedly is that the producers are out there who want to know what you're looking for in commissioning terms. But that's not the real thing. The real thing is that there are media journalists out there, sort of pencils poised in case you say the wrong thing, and therefore create a story. Press departments never want to create stories. You might think that they're in the publicity business and therefore that's their kind of job, but no, they want to make sure you don't create a story because it will almost certainly be a bad one. So to a degree, you are a little bit like a politician, kind of, whatever the awkward question is, you've got to find a way of dealing with it. But let's say the first 2 or 3 you feel a bit nervous. But long before the end, in my kind of cycle of just over a decade, you sort of think, oh, here we go again. Because what you're looking for one year is very unlikely to be very different from what you're looking for the previous year. Because you're looking for hit programs and brilliant talent who want to make things on your channel. So, eventually you do think, how can I restate the thing that I said last year and the year before? Then it depends a bit on who's interviewing you. I mean, some of them are, dare I say it, better than others. Sometimes you're interviewed by journalists. Sometimes it's kind of, fellow television commissioners or controllers. The most exciting one I ever did, if you want to call it exciting, was when I was at the height of the scandal that led to me leaving the BBC. The thing with the Queen and the Annie Leibovitz photo shoot, and this was all over the newspapers. So suddenly I found I was much more popular than I'd been the previous year. There was standing room only in the hall where I was doing my controller session.
Well, they were looking for like a public hanging or something.
It was public disemboweling, I think. Yeah, exactly. Maybe impaling or whatever. There's many ways in which you can torture controllers. Yeah. And I can remember it very well. The interviewer that year was Jeremy Vine. Jeremy Vine's a very, very nice man, but he's also a very good journalist. So he basically said, look, we've got an hour. I'm going to have to do quarter of an hour, 20 minutes on this problem, with this documentary about the Queen. And then don't worry, we'll move on to, whether you're looking for...
So your next job.
We didn't quite know that at that point.
And I'm really intrigued by this. How soon after then did they invite you in to fall on your sword?
Well, I mean, I don't know. My memory's not what it was.
But that was August, so you left in
I left in October. So the thing had happened in July. This was in August, and it was in October that I, as you say, fell on my sword. So it was still pretty fresh. It was still a pretty hot story. Yeah. So I definitely was the most popular controller that year. I mean, you couldn't get into the room. But again, Jeremy, he asked me all the right questions. He certainly didn't give me a soft ride. But I'd done a few interviews by then. I knew what was coming, and it wasn't that difficult. Actually, this is, of course, what happens in the world of politics. There was a report or an inquiry. So basically, if there's an inquiry or report in the pipeline, and politicians the world over know this, in a way, it's a little bit of a get out of jail card for you, because you just say, well, I can't possibly comment when there's an inquiry coming, even though I knew exactly what had happened and was in possession of all the facts about it.
But I said I wasn't going to go to the festival. I wasn't being entirely truthful. I am going to one session, and they very graciously allowed me to go to one session.
What, without paying your full
I think I'm paying for a half a day or something. I'm going.
To be fair, we're publicising the festival on this podcast.
We are.
We're doing them a hell of a favour. So you would think that they would basically roll out the red carpet for you.
By the way,
Trump for Putin.
Talking about us publicising things, I am in Edinburgh, where know the most famous place you can buy any woolen goods is the Edinburgh Woolen Mill, and I'll be going there later on today.
Try to get a discount. I'm
going to stock up on my woolen goods, because there's no better place to get woolen goods in Edinburgh than at the mill.
I'll text you my size.
Okay.
You're going to session. So what's the session you're going to see?
So I'm going to go along to Trump versus the media. And why? Because they've invited Roy Wood Jr., who's the host of Have I Got News For You in the USA. They've invited him over to be on a panel to talk about, what is actually on the lips of a lot of people in the media in America, which is, well, what is Trump going to do when it comes to being criticized by what he calls fake news and by comedians? I mean, let's just track back over the last few weeks.
Before we get into this, I just need to check something. He's called Roy Wood Jr. Is he the son of Roy Wood of Wizard fame, See My Baby Jive from the mid-70s, and indeed the man who wrote and sung I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day? Any relation?
I wish it was. I really wish it was.
Oddly, so do I, because
with the big sparkly beard.
Then I can say I'm a fan of his dad.
Roy was born in Alabama. He's an African-American comedian of great repute, and he's over here. And he's talking with a bunch of other people who have interest in this subject. I mean,
so Trump versus comedy is in the news at the moment.
If you go back to Colbert, I mean, this all goes back. We discussed it before on the podcast, where Paramount are trying to sell their business to another company. Trump could get in the way of that transaction, so they do a deal with Trump. They pay him $16 million for some spurious litigation he's leveled against ABC for editing an interview with Kamala Harris during the election, which he said was fake. And instead of just throwing it out of court, saying this is a ridiculous case, because it was, had no standing in law at all, they settled with him, getting $16 million. They then cancelled Stephen Colbert, the late night host, who's the most successful late night show currently. Now, we know late night isn't doing well financially, and that was the reason they gave. They said, it's not making any money, so we're going to close it down. Stephen Colbert went on the attack, and he's leaving next year. So there's that. And then another issue is South Park. South Park is owned by Paramount, which also does the Stephen Colbert Show. They did a massive deal of $1.5 billion for their streaming rights and 50 new episodes. So Matt Stone and Trey Parker in the pink, they banked the money, and then 2 weeks later, they launched the first episode of the new season 27 of South Park, and it showed Donald Trump in bed with Satan with a little tiny penis. At the end of the show, there was an AI version of a naked Donald Trump clambering over the desert, and it was absolutely brutal.
Hang on, you say this, Jim. Have you seen it?
Yes.
How can you see it? I don't know how to watch it.
You can't anymore because they've taken it off internationally. They said there's a dispute over the rights, international rights. You can't. I couldn't see episode 2.
So did you see it when you were in America? Then
No, it went out on Paramount Plus on the Thursday of the first week of the transmission of the new season.
Okay.
But then after the uproar and the White House coming out, I mean, the White House should just ignore this stuff. I mean, most senior politicians...
They've given it enormous... They've said something like, this show hasn't been relevant for over 20 years and is hanging by a thread with uninspired ideas and a desperate attempt for attention. I mean, just hilariously po-faced and stupid remark. In fact... The season 27 premiere delivered 6 million cross-platform views and had the show's biggest share in 25 years. So why are politicians so idiotic as to grace this with a comment at all, which simply makes people like me curious to see it? How can I see it now then, Jimmy, if they've taken it off? Do you know?
YouTube, if you go onto our friend YouTube, you can watch bits of it. You can watch the best bits. I mean, this is what Trump always goes for the ratings. He says, "Oh, this show's doing very badly in the ratings. They're losers." He's obsessed with the fact that, it's not a very good show, rather than just ignoring it. He can't resist it because that's where he lives. He lives in that world. The Apprentice was never the number one show on American television. It was sometimes number one in certain demographics, but for him, it was always the number one show, and it's the best show in the world. So I think what's happened here is that the Paramount, I don't know, the second episode wasn't shown, and they said it was always planned to be delayed because we're showing a compilation of all the best bits to celebrate 20 years of South Park on television. So we'll see. We'll see this week if it goes out. Listen, the fact is that these kind of leaders do not like to be satirized at all or teased. No politician does. I once sat next to Cherie Blair at a dinner, and she said, and I foolishly told her what I did for a living, and she's very nice actually. And we're both in Liverpool, and we both had a very nice chat about that. But she said how much she hated Have I Got News For You. And she said she thought that we were bringing the good name of politics into disrepute. And I said, no, I think probably your husband and Alistair Campbell got there first. We're just shining a light on it. But the truth is that, that it made me feel good because I thought, I thought we were just a stupid comedy show at the end of the week. The fact the Prime Minister and his wife are throwing things at the TV set while we're on made my heart jump.
But this is akin to politicians in the 1980s watching Spitting Image and eventually getting in touch with Spitting Image and saying, when you finish with me, can I have the puppet, please?
Well, and David Steele famously said, you remember David Steele was portrayed as being a little tiny puppet?
Yeah, he sat on David Owen's knee. Yeah.
He sat on his knee, and David Owen kind of patronized him. He said that was the end of my career as a serious politician. When I saw that, because there's an element of truth to it. I was once in Germany doing a panel on a TV thing about episodes, and I was interviewed by a journalist, and he said to me, so you're a comedy producer? I said, yeah. I said, what is the purpose of comedy? And I said, that's a very interesting question, and how German of you? And I said, well, there's lots of reasons. I mean, it's delightful when you're laughing involuntarily. It's a lovely feeling. The Sioux Indian says there are only two ways the truth gets into the world: tears and laughter is very important for all of us. I said, but seriously, comedy can take very difficult and frightening things and reduce them to a size. I said, for example, Charlie Chaplin. And then I stopped myself and thought, oh my God, I can't believe it. I've been in Germany. I've been in Germany 5 minutes. And I said to him, I'm really sorry, mate. I'm about to mention Adolf Hitler. I've only been in your country for 5 minutes. He said, it happens all the time.
Let's go to the next one. We haven't got any envelopes this week because neither Jimmy or I are in the studio with Owen. It's all.
We have a virtual.
We have a virtual envelope, and the virtual envelope.
Ah, right. Okay. Well, actually, this thing is really interesting. This story, it caught my eye this week. Is that Channel 5 are bringing back Play for Today. Now, Play for Today, they've ordered 4 episodes, I mean 4 plays. They're individual plays, they're single plays, and they're an hour long, or they're a commercial hour long. So they're a 45-minute story, and the story will resolve at the end of that hour, which is interesting because obviously they are, I mean, they used to be on the BBC.
BBC One,
I mean, you and I grew up watching them.
Yeah.
And they dealt with, difficult issues of the day, and it usually ended up with a couple. I remember once Keith Barron and Isla Blair, 2 very fine actors. I was about 13. I was watching Plays Today. My mother was there. My dad was there, and they ended up in bed. They were having an affair. It was about.
How old were you?
I was about 13.
So you were paying close attention to this.
Oh, yes. No, I was fascinated. I was looking for the moves. And my mother said, well, I was enjoying that. I was enjoying this play until that happened. And I said, Mum, because I was 13 and very arsey, Mum, it's only sex. And she said, well, there's no sex in this house. And my father ruffled his newspaper. But anyway, I digress. Play for Today was a brilliant way of bringing on new writers. I mean,
and by the way, there's a link with what we just said, because the most famous Play for Today, possibly, was one that was never broadcast. It was banned, called Scum.
Yes.
And so in a way, we're in the same world as South Park and the president and his tiny penis. That something become much more famous if it's banned. But of course, most Play for the Days weren't. There were more than 300 productions. It was the strand that brought Abigail's Party by Mike Leigh to the screen. That's a classic. It gave birth, if you like, to Rumpole of the Bailey with Leo
Yes,
McKern.
Which span off into a big series.
Extraordinary track record. And then sometime in the 1980s, they decided single plays on television. I mean, people don't tend to use the word plays about television. They tend to call them films, and things became more filmic. And so it kind of, it kind of died out as things died out. Now, I would say about this Channel 5 announcement, a couple of things. One, it's a good announcement. To a degree, they've got the value out of it already. And they're clever people at Channel 5.
They really are.
And they realise that, particularly in the middle of August, there is a lot of, you'll get a certain amount of coverage if you say you're bringing back Play for Today. What I think will be interesting to see, because they've only announced 4 of them, so they're putting a bit of a toe in the water here. It will be interesting to see whether they rate. I think one thing about doing a single film or play is that you can normally cast them very well, because people who won't commit to a 6-part, 8-part series will say, yeah, I like this script, I like this part, I'll do this. So I reckon, you can see already in the announcement there's some eye-catching casting. Sue Johnston from the Royal Family and many, many other things. Brilliant actress. She's going to be starring in a thing called Big Winners by Martha Watson Allpress. So, you're going for names that will be attention-grabbing names. We've got Anita Dobson elsewhere, Nigel Havers. So good announcements. You're going to get good casts. You may not mind if the ratings aren't stellar, although they may be, but you may not mind if they're not. But are they not? Is this not another sort of announcement that shows Channel 5 mutating from, frankly, a quite down market channel as it once was, back in the day, back in its very early days, and then it took on Big Brother for a while, but Big Brother somehow dragged its brand down. It's gone slowly and very consciously kind of upmarket to a place where it can say, don't patronize us, we do really interesting things, and this will help with that.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's another win for Ben Frow. In fact, there's a session at the Edinburgh TV Festival which jumped out at me because it's one of the only sessions involving what you would call a controller or a director of television, Ben Frow. It's called C5, Channel 5. C5 it's now called. Reinventing Risk and the Ben Frow Way. The Ben Frow Way.
I can tell you, having been in this world and done this radio before, there's no coincidence about the fact this Play for Today announcement came the week of or a week before Edinburgh. I think it's
clever.
Absolutely clever. Turning up at Edinburgh saying I'm reviving Play for Today gets you through your controller session almost single-handedly.
And also what they've done is they've said, and I know one of the production companies involved, LA Productions, a fantastic production producer, Colin McEwen, up in Liverpool. And he's Jimmy McGovern's producer, and they've just done the amazing film called Unforgivable, which is on the BBC. And C5 has said what they want to do is reach out and find writers and some producers who are from working class backgrounds. So backgrounds where a writer growing up wouldn't have any much what they call social capital or any means of getting into the business. They just want to write. So again, it's part of a kind of a nod towards being a public service broadcaster. It's Channel 5 saying, now they're owned by Paramount, or they're going to be owned by Skydance, which is a highly commercial organization. So you'd have to say, well, that's interesting that, there's no, it's an American organization, Skydance. They've got no mandate to be a public service broadcaster in Britain. And yet Ben, because he's a maverick, we talked the other day about in corporations, you can't have entrepreneurs, but you can have mavericks. Ben is a great maverick of getting a corporation and making a case to them that it makes sense for them to do something like this. And I think that
I don't think that's a difficult case to make, because you can make that case about anything that, if you like, is quality, that you say this is good for the brand, and this will lift people's perceptions of Channel 5. As I was saying earlier, it may not be the thing that rates the highest that week. That might be a kind of familiar, kind of formatted program, a returning drama like All Creatures Great and Small or whatever. But because it's, kind of investing in the sense of what Channel 5 is, that's not an anti-commercial thing to do. That's a commercial thing to do. That, if you only chase popular kind of programs, if you're governed and ruled by ratings or by return on investment, as the guys at the ad sale, the people in the ad sale departments tell you, this is what we want, more of that, then you'll eventually narrow and cheapen your brand. So I think it's a really smart thing to do. I don't think it's a counterintuitive thing to do. I think in quite the opposite. I think it is in line with a number of moves Channel 5 have made in recent years to sort of say to people, think again. We are kind of eating the BBC's lunch here.
Well, that's what I say.
It's a BBC brand.
And also, it does play well, as you say. It does. You're singing to the choir when you come to Edinburgh as the person who's reinventing Play for Today, because you can look back to the heritage. I think it ran from 1970 to the early 80s, but it did unearth some really brilliant talent, like you said, Mike Leigh. Abigail's Party, that got 16 million people. Now, it was a different era in those days. There was BBC One and BBC Two and ITV, but it did get 16 million people watching it. I remember
when I joined the BBC, there was a strand called Screen One.
I know we used to make them.
Yeah. I made one when I was at
Screen One and Screen Two, 90-minute films. Yeah.
That was, if you like, a kind of descendant of Play for Today. But interesting you used the word films there. They were defined as films, and they were more filmic. And again, it's sad to think that died out as well in due course. One question you might legitimately ask about these Play for Todays is how much, what are they going to cost, and how much of that comes from Channel 5? Because we now live in a world where drama needs to be financed in a mixture of ways. You need distribution money in there. You won't get it. You won't be able to make it with the broadcaster's contribution alone. Now, of course, if you're creating a new, detective series, to use an obvious example, then a distributor will pay attention because they'll think if this one catches on and runs and runs and runs and sells in lots of countries, it could be of great value to us. But a single play, that's much harder. So I'd be fascinated to know what is the overall budget, because the budget then translates into the production values. When we call them plays, are they going to be kind of in closed wall sets with not a lot of location, crowd scenes, all that kind of stuff that costs a lot of money? So what is the budget and how much of it comes from Channel 5? I don't think that's out there in the announcement, and there's no reason why it should be in the announcement, but it'd be fascinating to know.
When I saw this announcement, and I thought, my mind went back to, because Dennis Potter was discovered. He wrote plays for Today, and I remember, we haven't talked about the McTaggart lecture. The McTaggart lecture is the keynote, it's the big lecture which kickstarts it's the end of the first day of the Edinburgh TV Festival. I know you've done one a few years ago. What was your theme?
Oh God, I can't remember. I should be able to
none
remember.
None of us could remember it.
But, it wasn't that remember. No, I definitely had a theme. My theme was to say there's almost, if you like, a conspiracy between politicians, regulators, and people who work on the very serious side of television, news and current affairs, they can all get together in a circle and say, this is what television's about. It's about news, current affairs, and very serious stuff, impartiality, all this stuff. Very important stuff, not underestimated at all. How many minutes of regional news are there in your schedule? Is the news scheduled in the middle of peak time, or have you marginalised it? Kind of, because politicians care about that. They care about that partly because it's how they get on television, particularly regional news. So, but the point of mine was to say, but to most people, that isn't what television at all is. Television's entertainment. They get home from work, they sit down, they turn the television on saying, please entertain me more than please inform me. Now, that doesn't mean they don't want to be informed, because, the Reithian formula, inform, educate and entertain, interesting enough, in that order, by the way, does hold good. But it's interesting that in that formula, entertainment comes last. And I would argue that for most people out there, entertainment comes first.
But you're from that background. And I'm up here, and there are 3,000 shows. I'm wandering around there. I've got a choice of 3,000 shows. Most of them are comedy.
Yeah, you want to be entertained. Yeah.
There are 4 million people here wanting comedy. Then why doesn't TV put more comedy on? Because I think at the very top of all organizations, they are run by people who are not from the background of comedy. They don't understand it. They don't get it. They like it when it works, but they're frightened. Like you said, it doesn't sell well internationally. Play for Today, comedy. These things are all factors when you're looking at a macro organization saying, where should we spend our money? Comedy is risky. Just going back to the McTaggart, I remember the most memorable, yours was very memorable, Peter, but then the second most memorable
although I've forgotten it, weirdly.
Was a man called Dennis Potter, who was discovered by
I think he got a bit more coverage than me,
he was discovered by this very brand. And he said in his McTaggart lecture of 1993, when I discovered television, when television was invented, he was a young man. He looked at it in the corner of a room and said, at last, a place where I can tell stories. People don't have to read books. It will democratize great storytelling. It will empower the culture. It will be a great benefit to us all. And of course, he was talking about the past. And in 1993, his speech was called Occupying Powers. And his main complaint was about Rupert Murdoch taking over Sky. He was dying of pancreatic cancer. And he later, in another interview, called his tumour Rupert, in honour of the great media mogul. He then described John Burt. His big fear was that the BBC would in some way be infected by this commerciality, by this thing of just wanting to make money out of television. His thing was, yes, I know people want to make money out of television, but it's not just about making money. It's about making culture and about engaging. Look at Netflix with adolescents. Look at ITV with Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. You can do both. You can get people watching it.
I think when you looking back now, and obviously he was a revered figure, Dennis Potter. But you look back now and you think, I think you were wrong. I don't think Murdoch was Satan, and Sky have been a brilliant broadcaster in many ways. And you could go further than that and say the entire ecosystem of British broadcasting in as much as it works, and we know it's all got challenges and so on, works because it's a mixture of publicly funded, publicly owned, but like Channel 4, publicly owned, but commercially funded, fully publicly funded, the BBC, hybrids here, fully commercially funded, ITV, and so on and so forth. That in that mix, if you can sustain and keep that mix going, you've got. I don't want to say the best of both worlds because I don't want to sound all kind of mindlessly optimistic about this. But I would say if you looked at, it would be quite an interesting thing to do. You went back over Edinburgh television festivals over 30, 40 years, because that's a long time ago when Dennis Potter died. There are always people there sort of saying the end is nigh.
Of course.
But the end hasn't.
Well, they're saying it this year.
I'm sure they are. Of course
there's a session on YouTube saying the future or the end of TV as we know it, and that's about YouTube.
And I guess if I have an issue with this, and maybe this is framed a little bit by my time at the BBC, it's I don't personally have a big appetite for the navel-gazing tendency in television. I think some people love it. I think some love people they love to go up to Edinburgh, just as they loved getting together in large groups of people when I was at the BBC to say, let's forget about making programs now and entertaining the public, our job, if you like, and let's talk about us and let's talk about our industry and where's it going, and let's go all a little bit introspective and inward looking. I don't know about you, Jim, not my cup of tea. Yep. And I'm sure people up
not
there
for me
at Edinburgh are enjoying those sorts of sessions.
Well, I used to,
but I'd rather get back to making programs and doing, what I think. I don't think what television's role is in people's. Indeed, I don't think what television's role in people's lives is. Dare I say it, that complicated.
I think if you're new, when I was new in the late 80s, early 90s, I'd come to Edinburgh, and I wanted to bump into people who might want to buy a program. And I remember once we had an idea with Michael Jackson, who'd just been promoted to being BBC Two controller, and I saw him in a session. I was on the upper deck of a session looking down on him, and I had him in my crosshairs. I didn't take my eyes off him. I was like the figure from the Day of the Jackal. I just was he was my target. He left the session early, so I left the session early. And I walked around Edinburgh for half an hour following him until he went into the George Bar, where I happened to bump into him. So I was new. I wanted to meet people. I think it's for that purpose, it's very good. If you're new in the business, you've been in the business a couple of years, and you want to make your way in the business, it's a great place to meet lots of different people. Like I said, I've been to the Pleasance Courtyard, where all the main shows in the Edinburgh Festival are on, the Pleasance and Monkey Barrel. You can meet lots of TV people just milling around there. And if you're new in the business, that's a nice thing to do.
I do think this is a change, though, Jim, because when we were there in the late 70s doing the Cambridge Footlights Review, as we've talked about before, mysteriously called TAG, still waiting to hear from Griff. Why was it called TAG? But when we were students in the late 70s and we were hanging around the Pleasance Courtyard, were the people like you and me also there? I don't think so. In other words, it seemed to be a world for very young people. And by the way, I'm not singling you out here because I've got other friends who are up in Edinburgh checking out all the new shows. I don't want to use that word. I was saying, seasoned veterans of the business are up in Edinburgh checking out all the new shows. Yeah. That's new, isn't it? When we did An Evening Without, which was the show we did when Griffith got famous, so mysteriously 600 people a night wanted to see the rest of us.
Yeah.
Very, very nice it was. Even when we were doing that, I had the feeling that the audience was mainly people of our own age. I think it's
it's a mixed crowd. You do get a lot of Edinburgh people, of course, who do like the Fringe, and they come along, and they're various ages. Now, I remember in the late 70s when I was working at BBC Radio, and my then boss, David Hatch, who was a brilliant boss, he said to me, draw up a list of shows I can see in Edinburgh, and you can we'll go up, and you can hire a car and you can drive us around. So I drove him and two senior BBC executives, and I got a list of shows I thought they would like. I did the same this year. I said to someone who works at Hattrick, who is of a certain age, certainly a lot younger than me, and I said, Nick, can you kind of sort out some really good shows for me to go and see. So he's put this schedule together. So I think that's always happened, is you've had an older element going up. But no, I think you're right. I think that it's, well, I think boomers are, I'm afraid our boomer generation we're not going to go quietly. I'm now going to have to go off, Peter, because I'm about I'm about to see a show. I fed my dad to a penguin. I must be at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
I want to finish with one thing, is to say, don't judge a book by its cover. I think these silly titles, they might be shows that are then silly, but you never know. Let's face it, the sketch show that we grew up on and thought was the funniest thing ever made, which you can see, by the way, on YouTube anytime you like, and all the best sketches, was called Monty Python's Flying Circus.
I agree.
What was wrong with that as a title?
And I've remembered all of those silly titles, and that's the point of them, is that they jump off the poster.
Can I just say something? I hope Griff isn't listening. I think they're better than Tag.
Everything's better than Tag.
Okay. Thank you very much for listening. And any questions you want to ask about the world of television, you've always wanted to ask, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, you can send us an email, or you can just get in touch via our socials. All the info is in the description as usual. And if you really enjoyed this podcast, please do follow Insiders, the TV podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.